Surely. All right. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody who is joining from different parts of the world. Welcome to another round of Ambedkar lecture series. I'm going to give you a very brief introduction about what BSG is, what Ambedkar lecture series is, and I have the honor of welcoming our speaker for this session, Dr. Anandita Pan. So I'll do an introduction for her as well. Can everybody hear me fine?
Yeah.
Okay. So as you're aware, Ambedkar Lecture Series was organized by the Boston Study Group. The Boston Study Group is a not-for-profit entity registered as an Ambedkarite organization in the New England, USA area and is dedicated towards enabling a just and equitable society. How BSG does this is through study groups, monthly meetings, lecture series, and other social initiatives in and around the Boston area to create educational and infrastructure activities to carry forward the mission of just working towards a just and equitable society. The membership of BSG is composed of individuals, families, students, scholars, academics, and workers who share a collective vision of equality and upliftment of people. And BSG is specifically concerned towards supporting structures and working with students from historically marginalized backgrounds. The inspiration for BSG ranges from social and political reformers across the history, ranging from Buddha to Sant Ravidas to Savitribai to Jyotiba Phule to Periyar to Dr. Ambedkar. So that is what BSG has been doing for the past many years, specifically in the Cambridge, Boston area, but also enabling access to the knowledge bases throughout the world through the use of technological means. On behalf of BSG, I'm very honored and very pleased to welcome Dr. Anandita Pan for this session. Dr. Anandita is assistant professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IISER Bhopal. She obtained her PhD from Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Kanpur, and she also obtained her MA from the Center of English Studies at JNU. Her book, Mapping Dalit Feminism Towards an Intersectional Standpoint, was published by Sage Tree Publication in 2020. And she has a very interesting set of research interests, and they comprise interdisciplinary areas of humanities and social sciences with a very specific focus on gender, caste, governance, and citizenship. Her areas of research broadly include gender studies, Dalit feminism, intersectionality, and feminist standpoint theory. It's a whole bunch of intersectionality issues, but also deeply important issues that Anandita runs her research on. And we are very, very grateful to have her for the session today. She's currently working on caste, gender, and partition of Bengal and feminisms in the area of social media. In the coming years, she also intends to broaden her research in the area of cultural and gender studies with a special emphasis on sexuality and representation in literature and popular media. Again, I think it's a great honor and pleasure to have Dr. Pan with us. How we are structuring this particular session is that Dr. Pan will have the first minutes wherein she's going to present her insights and provide her inputs on the topic at large, Dr. Ambedkar and the question of gender. And subsequently, we'll open it up for the questions from the moderator as well as questions from the audiences as well. We are going to encourage audiences to keep their questions ready, either use the chat platform extensively if you have any questions, but we'll also open up the audience questions once the PowerPoint and the moderator question ends. And we'll encourage you to kind of introduce yourself and move ahead with the questions. And we are hoping for a very fulfilling discussion over the next hour or so. So over to you, Dr. Pan, and then subsequently we take it ahead from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pranay, for the very kind introduction. Please let me begin by expressing my gratitude to the Boston Study Group, Sanjay, Pranay, Priya, and also Hemantji for extending this kind invitation for this lecture. And, it is really meaningful because as we are nearing, a significant date, the 14th of April. It also is a very significant aspect for all of us to be here. And I feel really grateful that this online platform has enabled for many of us to really come together and have discussion on some of the topics that continue to persist in the society, not just in India, but in different parts of the globe as well. So with that, I will just share my screen in order to share some ideas with you. I hope the screen is visible to you all. Okay, so first and foremost, from my side, a very good evening to you all, because we are sitting in India. It's nighttime here, but I'm told that in the US it's in the morning. So good morning to all of you. And it took me a long time to really think about how I would like to structure this text or this today's lecture. So I was very much motivated to give a presentation or to talk about Dr. Ambedkar. And since I specifically work on the intersection of caste and gender, I wanted to centralize my presentation primarily in that aspect. But I also wanted to bring in some of the examples from popular culture, films and so on and so forth. So I would be doing that as well, being a practitioner in literature and a student of literature for a very long time. So today I have titled my presentation Structuring Inequalities, Ambedkar and the Question of Gender. And some of the aspects that I'll be discussing, many of you I'm sure are already familiar with it, but I think this is the question of gender and caste being intersectional in nature of now has been a long standing matter. But I think revisiting some of these issues may actually shed light in making us rethink some of the points in this regard. So let me begin with two of the very famous, one of the very famous texts, Caste in India, which kind of constitutes one of the core aspects of how caste has been theorized. And I believe that at times that we cannot really go ahead with discussions on caste without referring to some of the essential texts that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had pointed out. So now, the what really links Ambedkar with gender is the way in which he centralized on the idea of endogamy as one of the crucial aspects of caste. And this is what I have tried to really, cite here as well. So according to Dr. Ambedkar, endogamy was, or the process of fixing marriages within castes, justified the exclusivity of caste groups. And it also ensured that the birth-based origin system could follow through castes. And hereby, I'm also bringing in the notions of purity of blood. I will be going deeper into the problematics of mixed caste or mixed birth and so on and so forth. So, in an extremely nuanced understanding of the cause and effect of endogamy, Ambedkar propounded the issue of parity between marriageable units within specific castes. He notes that India in the ancient period was primarily exogamous. In a clan-based community, exogamy helped maintain unity among different clans through marriage. Now, as a result, marriage within one's blood kin and within the same class was highly discouraged. Now, complications very interestingly arose with the emergence of caste system and its tendency to retain, as I said, parity between men and women within caste by imposing endogamy. And here he is talking about the connection between social, patriarchal, and material consequences of caste, an aspect that has been emphasized by many theorists such as Sharmila Rege, Uma Chakravarti, and others who talk about caste not just in terms of birth-based origins in the later theorizations, but also connect the material aspects of it. So Ambedkar writes that if endogamy is to be preserved, conjugal rights from within have to be provided for. Otherwise, members of the group will be driven out of the circle to take care of themselves in any way they can. But in order that the conjugal rights be provided for from within, it is absolutely necessary to maintain a numerical equality between the marriageable units of two sexes within the group, desirous of making itself into a caste. The problem of caste then ultimately resolves itself into one of repairing the disparity between marriageable units of the two sexes within. So Ambedkar's observation here sheds light on the structural interlink between caste, class, and gender. He highlights that the need for numerical equality and marriageable units are there to preserve endogamy. And the connection is further explored by examining the complexity of caste and gender intersection with reference to endogamy. And I would also be exploring the link between caste, gender, and class to the concept of ownership. And this is how I'm going to structure my argument today. And I will be finally elucidating some of the points or revisiting them through a film named Turu or Checkmate. Okay, so here is one of a very, Sharmila Rege's iconic book, Against the Madness of Manu, where she's talking about a feminist take on caste. And I root myself or my argument also on this basis, whereby I would like to say that I'm also opting for a feminist take on caste by basing my argument on Dr. Ambedkar's perspective. So in framing the caste system, uh, around the practice of endogamy, Dr. Ambedkar highlights as I said, the notion of marriage within caste. And he notes that such parity, very interestingly, is often difficult to achieve when faced with death of one of the spouses. So in such situations, it's a very interesting, mathematical sort of format that Ambedkar provides. He says the problem of surplus man and surplus woman is resolved by specifying different rules for men and women. So surplus men and surplus women, he argues, pose a threat to the endogamous constitution of the caste system by creating the possibility of choosing a partner outside of their caste. See, previously, as we have seen that Dr. Ambedkar is talking about how endogamy depends on the parity of, equitable sort of pair of units, whereby one man and one woman is kind of made into a pair. Now, the moment one of the spouses or one of the persons is eliminated due to death or some other reason, and it causes the issue of surplus, that's when the problem of surplus man and surplus woman really, takes a central sort of position. So Ambedkar points out that each of these, castes resolves this problem by uh, opting for either child marriage in case of surplus men, and by imposing stringent customs of sati or burning of the widow or enforced widowhood on surplus women. Now, this different treatment of surplus men and surplus women highlights the latent sexism within caste system. And this is how Rege talks about that, how Ambedkar opts for a feminist take on caste by centralizing his argument on endogamy and marriageable units of men and women. So it is then in recognizing such regulatory and discriminatory practices that Ambedkar's understanding of caste as a gendered category becomes important. So very interestingly, surplus men were highly encouraged to opt for a second marriage after death of the spouse. And this is where the very neatly aligned patriarchal system comes in. So, we often talk about how patriarchy really survives so well because it's such a malleable system whereby it naturally and easily embraces all other structures that are based on inequality, such as caste, capitalism, or anything at all. So the caste system, aligning with the patriarchal ideologies, did not allow surplus man or a widower to be subject to the same treatment as surplus women. Because losing a man was losing labor and depleting group numbers. So the problem then was resolved by marrying him to someone from a not yet marriageable group. In other words, a child marriage, where a moral fence is scaled by institutionalizing girl-child marriage. And this is where the notion of surplus becomes very, interestingly divided into two neatly separate groups. On the one hand, for women, we are seeing that the solutions that are provided to take care of the surplus women is that either they are eliminated through the practice of sati, or there is imposed widowhood, whereby they are supposed to remain enunciate, renounce their worldly lives, completely don a white sari, all sorts of worldly uh, appearance that would make a woman desirous or desirable is completely eliminated by clothing her in a white garment, chopping her hair off, removing all sorts of markers of beauty or sexual appeal, let's say, and she is made into a complete non-desirable object. On the other hand, the necessity of the surplus man is never really reduced, and it is actually resolved by opting for a not yet girl from a not yet marriageable group, which is often a child marriage is encouraged here. And on the other hand, Ambedkar argues that surplus women were menace to the caste group because, and this is where the notion of women's sexual agency also comes in the problematics, because they might marry outside the caste and violate endogamy, or they might marry within the caste and thereby encroach upon the chances of marriage that must be reserved for the potential brides in the caste. So here we see that endogamy takes a very complex role in ensuring how the caste structure remains intact. So the solution then, as I said, was either to burn them or to deprive them of any natural right of becoming a legitimate wife in the future by enforcing widowhood. Now, widowhood also brought with it undesirability, as I said, and rejection or erasure of allurement. The possibility of any immorality of widow was resolved by visibly dressing her in drab and colorless clothing, and by confining her within the domestic sphere, and by morally presenting widowhood as aesthetic. So, female sexuality in case of surplus women was specifically threatening because it created the possibility of bearing progeny outside the caste. And this is where the connection between caste, gender, and class also becomes important, because hereditarily a father's property was handed down to the son. So, the birth of a son fathered by a man from another caste created the fear of the loss of property. So, the caste system functioned through a complex interaction with gender and class. Now, with reference to female sexuality, Uma Chakrabarti draws attention to the production and the reproduction being two fundamental reasons behind excessive control over women's sexuality. So she argues that with the collapse of clan-based society and the rise of private or exclusive ownership over land in the post-Vedic period, the sexual behavior of certain categories of women needed to be under male control and also needed to be closely guarded. So in the patrilineal society, it was crucial to ascertain that the progeny belonged to the same caste, and as I said, the property also remained within the same caste. This practice was specifically imposed on the upper caste women because the Brahmins controlled land, and anxiety about purity of blood was a Brahminical construct. And this also gave rise to this concept that Uma Chakrabarti talks about, the idea of Brahminical patriarchy, whereby it promotes different sets of rules for different groups of women belonging to upper and lower castes. And the stringent rules regarding marriage and female sexuality validates Dr. Ambedkar's conceptualization of endogamy as the mechanism of caste system. Now, in this context, let me give you a couple of examples from his iconic, riddles in Hinduism. This is a fascinating text whereby he unpacks many of the riddles that are there in the, Hindu mythical and texts, and also Manusmriti. So, in riddles in Hinduism, Ambedkar provides a detailed reading of the Vedic text, denouncing their authority. In connection with his views on endogamy as the root of the caste system, I'd like to bring into focus a couple of riddles, riddle number 18 and 19. So, riddle number 18 is titled Manu's Madness, or the Brahmanic explanation of the origin of mixed castes. And he says that a reader of Manusmriti will find that Manu, for the purposes of his discussion groups, the various castes under certain specific heads, namely Aryan caste, non-Aryan caste, Pratya caste, fallen caste, and Shankara caste. So in riddle number 18, he shows how Manu validated caste division by legalizing endogamy and prescribing strict punishments for any aberration of it. So if you look at the what is my right hand side, whereby there is a chart provided. The chart goes much longer. I'm just providing a small glimpse of it, where Manu is listing how progeny of mixed Aryan caste are to be treated. So there is father, mother, progeny known as Anuloma or Pratiloma. We'll be discussing these in detail soon. So he is looking at aspects. If a child is fathered by a Brahmin and the mother is mothered by a Kshatriya, then what is the caste of the child? Then there is a very neat categorization provided by Manu, so that there is no confusion as to how the child's caste is to be determined. So as we see here, by Shankara caste, Manu meets caste of the members of which are born of parents who do not belong to the same caste. So, and he divided them into Anuloma, Pratiloma, and there are different categorizations as to which, Shankara castes are accepted and which children are not really accepted. So, riddle number 19 is titled The Change from Paternity to Maternity. What did the Brahmins wish to gain by it? Here he identifies the ways to enforce endogamy as being rooted in Brahmanical, patriarchal, and material practices. So he says that, this is a quotation from Mr. Main in his treatise on the Hindu law, where he pointed out some anomalous features of the rules of kinship. So he says that no part of the Hindu law is more anomalous than that which governs the family relations. Not only does there appear to be a complete break of continuity between the ancient system and that which now prevails, but the different parts of the ancient system appear in this respect to be in direct conflict with each other. So he refers to the law of inheritance, and vis-a-vis the family law, and he talks about how there are different kinds or 8 different forms of marriage that are often recognized. And he's also listing further what are the rules in terms of what sort of gift should be given to the daughter in marriage, and so on and so forth. So in this very restrictive sort of format, on the proper conduct of how a human being or a Anuloma or Pratiloma child is supposed to really behave, we see that Dr. Ambedkar, approached the Manusmriti or Manu's method through the way in which moral anxiety was generated by Manu. So he says that the confusion in Manusmriti, which Ambedkar calls as Manu's madness, arises through Manu's dicta on the Anuloma and Pratiloma marriages the resultant Sankara child. So despite endogamy being prescribed practice of marriage, Hindu families could also marry their daughters to men of higher castes so as to get higher status for themselves. And this was known as Anuloma or hypergamy. Now, Pratiloma or hypogamy was a complete contrast to this, as the bride's caste was higher than that of the groom's. Though neither of these practices were prescribed, per se, the Pratiloma actually faced greater denunciation than Anuloma. And here the figure of the Shankara child, a child of mixed blood belonging to undetermined and thereby inferior caste, becomes the cause of confusion. Uh, Manu writes that if this question should arise, which is higher, someone born by chance from a priest father in a non-Aryan mother, or from a non-Aryan father in a mother of a priestly class, this is the decision. So Manu writes that someone born from an Aryan father in a non-Aryan woman may become an Aryan in this quality, but someone born from a non-Aryan father in an Aryan mother is always a non-Aryan. The law has been established, and neither of these may undergo the transformative rituals because the birth of the former is deficient in Aryan characteristics, and the latter is born what he terms as against the grain. So hereby we see how the problematics of mixed marriage is once again employing a very clear Brahmanical patriarchal hierarchy, whereby if the father is an Aryan belonging to the Brahmanical upper caste category, then the Shankara child will gain a status higher than the mother. But the other side of it is not at all encouraged. So Dr. Ambedkar points out that according to the Chaturvarna system, in most kinds of exogamous unions, Shankara child is always given the father's varna. An alternation to this patrilineal patriarchal tradition occurs when the mother's varna is more than one lower than the father's. Then the child is given mother's varna. Ambedkar views a deeply graded caste and gender hierarchy inherent in such matrilineal or matri savarna system. Now, interestingly, this matrilineality, instead of empowering women, actually reveals a differential rule of mating and lineage for men and women of different castes. Now, Ambedkar then was keenly aware of the differences among women, and he was also very cautious about staying away from imposing potential homogeneity. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar was quite vocal about drawing attention to the specific oppression on Dalit women that made them different from upper caste women. And here I would like to provide reference to, the famous Mahar Satyagraha, where Dr. Ambedkar urged Dalit women to give up markers of caste such as the way they used to wear saris above their knee and keep their breasts bare. So Ambedkar instead actually urged them to wear saris like Brahmin women because they are as respectable as any other woman. Now, Urmila Pawar and Meenakshi Moon have noted that after listening to Baba Saheb's speech, the women who had come for the conference in Mahad actually turned up the next day wearing their 9-yard saris around their ankles like Brahmin women. Now, at this point, I would also like to emphasize that, wearing clothes like upper caste women did not signify an acceptance of Brahminical ideals. Dr. Ambedkar's critique was in fact rooted in understanding the practices of lower caste women being bare-breasted and wearing clothes in a particular way to signify their caste as humiliating. So such kind of dress code signified lower caste women's sexual availability, which was also associated to their presence in the public sphere. So we need to see the Ambedkar statement not as imposing Brahminical ideals of womanhood and honor on the Dalit women per se, but by way of urging Dalit women to wear saris like upper caste women. Dr. Ambedkar was actually assuring that they can affirm their agency by way of clothing themselves in a way that is denied to them historically. So for Dalit women, wearing saris like upper caste women signified a challenge to Brahminical patriarchy. Now, I would like to address some of these ideas today with the example of, a very interesting film called Turu. So, Turup was released in 2017. It's a film by Ektara Collective and is also shot in the entire shooting of it has happened in Bhopal. And, it's a very interesting film where Ektara Collective actually, is talking about how they started filming this film, this whole story. And in the story of Ektara, they mention that their films are consciously political as they choose to stay away from scripted dramatization. So rather than play of emotions, they want to convey their propaganda very openly. And that is why their actors and advisors belong to the groups of which these stories are based on, which is a very interesting way of challenging the whole politics of film as a capitalist media, whereby very consciously groups such as Ektara Collective are laying themselves bare right in out there and making films of this sort accessible to all without necessarily going into the politics of profit and so on and so forth. So the film Turup, as the photograph or the poster shows here, it basically highlights how people move like pawns in a board of chess, controlled by the multiple structures of caste, gender, and religion. Now, the game of chess, much like the Chaturvarna system, emerges as a masculine casteist game. So, chess is a game which is often played in the public sphere, and that which highlights the points like mental ability of strategizing, almost like one being in the war field. So, roles and rules are extremely stringent in this game, as we know, and we cannot change the roles of the pieces on this board, much like the unchangeable aspect of caste as well. Once we are born in a specific caste, we cannot really change it. So, thus, a queen remains a queen, pawn remains a pawn, and so on and so forth. So, in this film, the story largely follows the relationship between a Dalit girl and a Muslim man, and the right wing political party's opposition to it. And the story ultimately shows the victory, whereby the couple emerged victorious through a legal battle. And Turu brings forth issues of intercaste and interreligious union and its conflict with Brahmanism. It shows how the Hindutva party, which otherwise avoids the touch of Dalits, tries to bring Dalits within the Hindu fold so as to impose Brahmanical ideas of marriage on Dalits and prevent the Dalit girl from marrying a Muslim boy. So we see, how the members of the Hindutva parties are sticking posters in Dalit villages about how Hindu girls should all be like the upper caste goddesses, Saraswati, Lakshmi, and so on. As we see here, the poster reads Bharatiya Nari Kaun Hai with the image of Saraswati and Lakshmi beneath it. And we also see how this Hindutva group is manipulating the Dalit boy Deepak into taking up role of a patriarch to marry off his sister Lata, who is incidentally also in love with another Muslim man, Majid. So Brahmanism, therefore, is shown as operating through control on Dalit women's sexuality. It recognizes interlink between caste, gender, and religion, and some of the other intricate factors as well. Now, what becomes a memorable aspect in the film is how a group of women stand together in solidarity in support of the couple. So the catalyst of this collective is Monica, as we see the elderly woman here, who works as a maid in the upper caste household of Nilima. So the scenes here are very interesting, and I would like to explain them a little bit. So in a conversation where we see that Nilima was a journalist, and now she is trying to have a child, and her husband is an upper class business industrialist, and she is suffering from lots of health conditions because of the treatment that she's undergoing in order to have a child. And she is having a conversation with Monica where she's asking that how many children do you have? Then she responds by saying that, oh, I forgot that you did not get married. To which Monica responds, it is not like I did not get married. It is that I didn't marry. So the Hindi is basically ऐसा नहीं कि मेरा शादी नहीं हुआ, मैंने शादी किया ही नहीं. So in other words, it shows the agential aspect of Monica as well, whereby she is looking at marriage as a choice rather than as a necessity, which is articulated by someone like Nilima. And we see that Monica's choice to live as an unmarried Dalit woman, living with another Dalit woman, and her observations on family and companionship completely challenges the aura of sacrosanctity, inevitability, and heteronormativity surrounding marriage and family. So she argues that family is not relational, but rather one that is created through camaraderie. And it is this realization that leads Monica to give shelter to the ostracized couple. Now, in the process, she also invites Nilima, who used to be a journalist, to be part of this struggle. So Nilima, she tells Nilima that I have a work for you. So Nilima asks, what work? So she says, there is a story which I want you to cover. And we see in the film how Monica is exercising her agency or her control over how the story should be narrated, at what time should the story be published, and so on and so forth. So Nilima here is seen often as, and this is where the aspect or the idea of solidarity and affinity really comes in, whereby we see a scope of, Nilima standing with Dalit women rather than imposing her views on them. So it is, in fact, Monica who asks Nilima to interview the Dalit girl.
Hemant?
Am I audible? Sorry, there was a bit of, yeah. Okay. So it is, in fact, we see that it is Nilima who is, Monica who is asking Nilima as to when the interview should be conducted. So Nilima is not presented as a narrator who is assuming supremacy in terms of her narrative agency or taking up a very patronizing attitude. The film, in fact, shows that even after solidarity is created, one has to really work towards it in keeping the affinity alive. So finally, when this becomes clear in the newspaper report written by Nilima, so the title of the report reads, "Bhopal love jihad कांड की पीड़िता का बयान मैं अपनी मर्जी से आई हूँ." So she says it was my decision, says the girl of Bhopal love jihad case. And we can contrast two images here where we see that first and foremost, in the first scene, we see that initially Monica was sitting on the ground, being the household maid. In the second scene, however, by the end of the film, we see that Monica is sitting on the sofa beside Nilima, and Nilima is facing her and showing her the news report, which has actually emerged. So, this indicates the possibility of coalition among women, which cuts across caste and class hierarchies. And as I said, the title of the illusion of love jihad also places the issue within the Hindutva Brahmanical, patriarchal context and reveals that it is a specific Brahmanical attempt to prevent an interreligious marriage. So my motivation in bringing this film as an example for the today's talk was to highlight the ideas of endogamy, how it percolates through different castes and also different religions as well. So practices such as endogamy then reroutes caste as a domestic issue and thereby challenges the public-private distinction. So a feminist reclamation of Dr. Ambedkar intervenes in the dominant idea of caste as solely a public issue by incorporating the personal within its political world. Something that feminists have talked about vis-a-vis gender as well, that the personal is political. So understanding marriage as a way of maintaining caste hierarchy makes caste an issue that structures the private sphere as much as it does the public. Uh, in contemporary Dalit politics, very interestingly, questions have often been raised by Dalit women activists and theorists also, that their voices are not often given due space or they are suppressed. Now, in such context, reviving Dr. Ambedkar in the spectrum of a gendered understanding of caste can give us a more holistic perspective of the mechanism of caste system and how it should not be seen in isolation. Now, such reinterpretation of caste through a feminist lens may provide the answer to address the division between Dalit politics, mainstream Indian feminism, and Dalit feminism. For example, in 2016, during the Una March, which paved new direction in Dalit politics, uh, there was during the one of the walks, the Dalit women leaders of the Dalit Mahila Swabhiman Yatra, a protest held in Rajasthan in 2016, pointed to the fact that Dalit women were not included in the decision-making bodies of the Dalit organization in Una. Gauri, a member of the Karnataka Janashakti, emphasized in an interview that as women, we have to fight to be heard, we have to yell louder in comparison to men. In the same interview, another activist, Sanghaballi Aruna Lohitakshi, said that in Una, barely any other Dalit women were allowed to speak. In the end, Manisha Mashal, another activist from Haryana, tried to step up to the mic, but one of the men on the stage actually grabbed her hand and tried to pull her back. She had to physically pull herself free to be able to speak. So these narratives reveal how silence is forced on Dalit women in order to retain the focus exclusively on caste. And such binarism of caste and gender as envisioned and practiced by mainstream feminism and Dalit politics also emphasizes the ever increasing need to recognize the intra-group divisions within the anti-caste struggles and the patriarchal attitude and importance of Dalit women's voices. Now, more recently, another example I'd like to give is that of the hashtag #MeToo movement, which has taken the world, including India, by storm, and also initiated important conversations about its constituency women. Now, in India, the hashtag #MeToo movement encompassed the fields of academia, media, cinema, journalism, and so on and so forth. And it is also seen to be initiating a new wave of feminist consciousness in India. In this context, however, the constituency of the movement, woman, and its idea of feminism have been contested by Dalit feminists, who have argued that the concept of sexual harassment in the workplace, on which the hashtag #MeToo movement is built, comes at the cost of erasing caste and promoting Savarna perspective. So, in this context, Dalit feminists have invoked the Bhavri Devi rape case to show how that the caste gender-based implications of violence experienced by Dalit women gets erased in the generalized interpretation of sexual harassment of women in the workplace. So, in their approach to the #MeToo movement, Dalit feminists have also highlighted the importance of intersectionality by criticizing the shortcoming of mainstream Indian feminism in failing to address the cause of Dalit women and the issue of caste. Now, these examples then highlight the need to recognize the intertwined nature of caste and gender. And Dr. Ambedkar's conceptualization of endogamy as the mechanism of caste may become the edifice on which such transformative politics can be built. Dr. Ambedkar's reviewing of caste through the lens of endogamy reveals the complex ways in which Brahmanical patriarchal supremacy is maintained by providing elaborate rules and stringent punishment regarding marriage. By fixing marriage within castes, purity of blood is maintained, the ownership of property and land are retained in the hands of the upper castes, and the degradation of the lower caste people continue to perpetuate. So, a feminist take on caste underscores this importance of addressing, caste through the lens of gender. Dr. Ambedkar, therefore, can be revived to challenge this false segregation among anti-caste politics and feminism to pose a more holistic challenge to caste sexism. Now, I would like to emphasize that by intertwining caste and gender, I do not mean to, talk about absorption or token inclusion of one into another. In fact, like Dr. Ambedkar, the purpose here is to recognize the differences among women and among Dalits and address them. And thus, in case of endogamy, the way is to really oppose the, ideas of sati and impose widowhood. And he does not claim to establish any sort of homogeneity per se. In fact, as we see in his essays and speeches, he repeatedly addresses the specific situations where Dalit women are oppressed differently than upper caste women. So Dr. Ambedkar's feminist take on caste becomes emancipatory because it challenges the very systems that create these kind of structured inequalities on different groups of women. So it is in this recognition of the multi-axis hegemonic system as affecting different groups of people that a new direction towards solidarity politics can be built. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this, Dr. Anandita. I think really going into the theoretical concepts of reading about Dr. Ambedkar's paper on caste, its mechanism, development, to focusing on riddles in Hinduism, and subsequently looking at how that is shaping up the current discourse. How are we looking at the material? How are we really manifesting the material in real life in movements? I think that was very, very telling. We are now going to move into the question and answer session. For the participants, anybody who is interested to raise a question to Dr. Anandita, there are two options. The first option is to raise your hand, and the second option is to put your question in the chat. And depending on how it goes, we'll open the floor for various questions. But I think I'm going to use my moderator privileges, and I'm going to ask my first question, and then subsequently we move to the audience. You briefly mentioned about the notion of Brahmanical patriarchy in the discourse, and I think a few years back there was the entire social media was taken by storm in terms of understanding this and what this entails. How do you see this particular discourse? Has this discourse really taken the movement ahead in terms of better understanding of how the interplay of caste and gender happens? And what do you think can be done more with respect to this discourse in the future pertaining to this discourse? I think this is my question. And subsequently, we'll move to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pranay. Brahmanical patriarchy, I think, has opened really newer directions to understand patriarchy in a much more complex manner. So, traditionally speaking, when we talk about patriarchy, of course, the terminology has gone on to expand itself to look at gender not just in binary terms, but through multiple different kinds of identities as we continue to expand the scope of identities beyond male and female, strictly speaking. Now, how Brahmanical patriarchy has contributed in redefining patriarchy is by completely transforming the way in which we look at the patriarchal structure function. So, what Brahmanical patriarchy does is that it necessarily looks at the system of patriarchy as not leading to the single axis of hierarchy in terms of gender hierarchy alone, but it sees how it functions in collaboration, in conjunction with caste system. So to give a very brief, example, again, perhaps we can go back to Manu himself, or even the way in which Uma Chakrabarti talks about. So, the notions of imposed widowhood, or the notions of how women are, upper caste women are supposed to remain within the domestic sphere. One of the arguments is that why does this rule specifically apply to the upper caste women? And it is primarily to ensure that the purity of the blood is maintained within, the upper caste community. On the other hand, we see that the same patriarchal, sort of view is looking at the lower caste women as sexually available because of their presence within the public sphere. And it is also trying to ensure that certain aspects or activities, such as, once again, we can go back to how do different kinds of violence, different forms of violence get meted out to different groups of women. So why do forms of public gang rape, for example, become so common for the lower caste or Dalit women? It's once again to highlight the emasculation of the entire Dalit community, to show the sexual availability of the Dalit women, and so on and so forth. So Brahminical patriarchy has opened up completely newer directions to understand that not all women are affected by patriarchy in the same way, and it has benefited later understandings tremendously. And the way in which I see it impacting today's world and future is, maybe I can go back to the hashtag Me Too movement once again. So there is this very interesting documentary named Writing with Fire, which was released in 2021, which documents the life of Khabar Lahariya, not just the stories they covered, but also the lives of the journalists as well. And there they show a very interesting difference, where we see that, in Khabar Lahariya, the groups of women are actually, showing how they get impacted by their caste identities, how they're unable to get or rent a place in specific locations because of their caste, how they are facing challenges from within their household, whereby their parents are saying that because you're a journalist, you will never be able to get married, and the other sorts of problems they face when they go out on the field, because it is not expected from a woman journalist to be out on the field, let alone a Dalit woman. And the film also raised very important questions that, as we go on to celebrate issues such as accessibility or solidarity in through hashtag Me Too, which has paved way for many women from different groups all across the world to come together. The question also was raised about who really has access to languages such as English or even a smartphone. So who even has access to education or such other class mobility, and so on and so forth. So in other words, we see that the discussion surrounding Brahminical patriarchy need to be fostered even further, so as to really look at even moments of so-called agency for women in a much more complex manner. I hope I answered your question.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And for the audiences as well, Writing with Fire was nominated for the Academy Award a few years back. So if you've not watched that documentary, do check it out. It's a brilliant portrayal of India's perhaps only all-women led newspaper. We are going to move on with the questions from the attendees. I see Pavandeep Kaur's hand up. Pavandeep, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm Pavandeep Kaur, and I'm currently at the stage of forming my research questions for my PhD proposal. And I wanted to ask this question particularly in one context. So through this discussion of today on caste and gender intersectionality, I want to understand how this intersectionality works among other religious groups like Muslims. And so I'm curious about the question, if you can shed some light on how this particular approach can be used within this context. So my question is how the Pasmanda caste, which is the other backward caste Muslims, how this caste intersects with gender, religion, caste, and education to empower Muslim girls through education, particularly madrasa education. So if you can share something, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pavandeep, for your question. I am not familiar with the specific, ways in which caste, gender, and education is working vis-a-vis this specific group, but I can briefly or talk about, provide an overview about how you can look at or employ the lens of intersectionality to understand the complexities of caste, gender, religion, and education as well. So first and foremost, the theory of intersectionality, as we know it, is a very crucial, and now it has really become one indispensable part of our study. We all want to be intersectional. We like to be intersectional. If you want to see the debate, there is a very interesting debate between Mary John and Nivedita Menon as to an EPW, as to whether we need intersectionality, the term at all anymore. Okay, so perhaps you can take a look at that as well. But the crux of intersectionality is that it is a theory which looks at the ways in which different axes of oppression intersect with each other, not in an additive format, but in the way in which they come together to create specific kinds of oppression. Just now I talked about Brahminical patriarchy. So I said how it creates different situations for different groups of women. So intersectionality would necessarily help us reorient our perspectives into understanding how systems of caste, gender, and so on and so forth really create different kinds of situation for different groups of women. Now, with reference to religion, see, one very crucial point that you mentioned is that when we look at the entire system of caste, we necessarily look at it or embrace it within the system or within the religion of Hinduism. But as we also are aware that caste also resides or is very nicely practiced in other religions as well. For example, Dalit Christians in Kerala, even though they got converted into an so-called egalitarian religion, we also continue to see how caste persists among converted Dalit Christians, and how they are constantly discriminated by keeping them separate in a different church, how not letting them sit within the same space as the converted Christians who are converted from the upper caste. Now, you can look at the question or the complexity of religion by extending the issue of caste beyond the purview of Hinduism alone, and looking at the entire maybe Indian subcontinent, that sort of context. And I would also like to emphasize that if you any sort of study or the basis of intersectional study that you do, one of the lessons that I learned is to completely unlearn all the assumptions that I have. So one of the things that we naturally or automatically often proceed to or begin with is that okay, these are the group of people who therefore will inevitably be incapable of doing certain kinds of things. That may or may not be the case. And the reason I am articulating is because the process of both feminist and intersectional learning is also often unlearning. So I would suggest that, if you are, it sounds like a fascinating topic actually, the idea of religion going beyond the lens of Hinduism alone. And I would really encourage you to look at intersectionality and perhaps also standpoint theory in expanding your scope of how you are going to assess or look at the interreligious group, so to say. Did I answer your question? I hope that was somewhat okay.
Yes, just to add on to this, like how can we use this Ambedkar's approach that we are discussing today
Right.
to use in this context? And the intersectionality approach and similar approaches to answer the question that I raised, can we, is it more appropriate to use some particular method to answer this, like qualitative methods, or what methods should we be looking at in your perspective?
Right. So, see, today we talked about specifically Dr. Ambedkar's idea of endogamy, and if we, I have also briefly mentioned the film Turup, where we see that the idea of endogamy is also extending to interreligious marriages as well, not just intercaste marriage. So, you can look at Ambedkar. In fact, I am reminded of his famous quotation that I was born a Hindu, but I will not die one. And he finally, before his death, he converted to Buddhism. So one way of looking at it is you can assess that how the scope of religion itself, whether it is Hinduism or Islam or Christianity, whether the scope of that religion itself is embracing casteism or not, and that would require for you to do ethnographic study of that religion as well. And in terms of the qualitative methods, I would say that you can definitely opt for different ethnographic methods are there, and intersectionality, I would say, can become a very formulative methodology in your study as well.
Thank you so much for addressing that, Anandita. Moving on, there's a question from Vidya Kadir in the chat. Can you please contextualize this discussion in Kerala where Brahmins or Nambudris had to marry outside their caste, other than the elder son, and also the fact that ownership of land was in the hands of the Nair caste, which were categorized as Vaishyas or Shudras. Do you think the framework applies? Do you think there are certain similarities and differences? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vidya, for the question. In fact, it's one of the very, crucial aspects whereby we continue to think that, especially in the Kerala context, and I think Vinci is also in the, participant list. We have had conversations in this regard, where we presume that this whole system of sambandham, whereby, Nambudiri men and Nair women were having relations, and the ownership of property often used to remain within the hands of Nair families, whether that itself was a matrilineal or very sort of emancipatory aspect for women. Now, there are different ways of looking at it, I would say, and from what my limited study that I've done, the notion of sambandham actually emerges as a very sort of patriarchal aspect, I would say, because it almost gave the agency of uniting with Nair women completely to the men. So a lot of times we presume that it is something that is leading to Nair women having a lot of agency. So I will give an how the example of how scenes used to pan out. So during the union with a Nambudiri man, Nair woman would actually place the chappals, the sandals of her husband outside the house, so that the Nair husband knows that there is a Nambudiri man inside, and he will either wear the chappal and leave or stay outside. So in many cases, it has been seen as something of an agency for the Nair woman. But another question we can also ask is that in a system where such aspect is made into a necessity or mandate, what really is agential for the Nair woman? Is it really becoming a matter of agency or not, or is it becoming a matter of social system whereby it's necessary for Nair women to inevitably have some sort of relationship or unite with the Nambudiri man? So that is one of the questions perhaps we can ask.
Hey Pranay, you can take Priya, and meanwhile I will chat with Ambedkar.
Surely. Priya, can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anandita. It was a very thought-provoking presentation. I very educative. So my question, I'm sorry if I missed this in the presentation, but how do Ambedkarite perspectives on gender inequalities differ from mainstream feminist theories?
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Priya, for the very pertinent question. Now, one of the reasons why, I talked about Sharmila Rege and her feminist take on caste, feminist take, Ambedkar's feminist take on caste, basically, is, see, first and foremost, and this has continued to be one of the persistent divides between mainstream Indian feminism and Dalit feminism also, whereby, it's argued that when mainstream feminism looks at the question of gender, it predominantly tends to look at gender in a very single axis format, in a very homogeneous sense, whereby women are defined as a category who are specifically impacted by patriarchy, again in a homogeneous term, and in the way in which the historically predominant feminist movements have followed, they have gone on to bring in the issues of class to an extent. But caste has somehow remained a matter of that has been, resisted, so to say. Maybe let me give an example of from Bengali Dalit women writers, because they have been talking, writing from Bengal has taken a center stage, Dalit writing of now. And it's also interesting because in Bengal we like to claim ourselves as Marxist and emancipated, and we claim that we do not have caste, which is of course a very wrong appropriation and assumption. So one of the instances that Kalyani Thakur Charal, she talks about in her autobiography, Why I Write Charal, Chandal to My Name. And she says that when she was publishing and in one of the bookstalls where she was releasing her book, Need or Home, one of the very prominent feminists actually came and said that you guys are, bringing in division to the whole feminist politics, and we do not support you. And Kalyani Ji actually chose to mention the name in her autobiography, so that in order to, call them out and say that how these sort of gestures lead to much more separatism. And it also comes from the assumption that being, the knower of certain issues, now they have much more knowledge about other person, in Spivakian terms, speaking for or on behalf of someone, or speaking as someone. Okay, so in that sense, one of the ways in which Dalit feminism has tried to challenge the mainstream feminist assumptions regarding caste, basically, is to really call for solidarity based politics. So in mainstream feminism, a lot of times issues get categorized only as feminist issues, or they are completely ghettoized or removed, because of the guilt issue that we are not Dalit, so we shouldn't be talking about them. Now this being a Dalit or becoming a Dalit is a continuing problem in the entire discourse of caste and Dalit feminism. Now, it would also mean that the praxis that Ambedkar is proposing to us is to constantly undergo a process of self-reflexivity, where we understand our own privilege and reinvent ourselves as Dalit feminists, which would also mean, to go back to Sharmila Rege, not to impose our views on or talk about or on behalf of Dalit women, but to really learn from their lives. Because we have to be aware that, one cannot automatically have that experiential advantage in this regard. But if we continue to remain completely aloof and say that, okay, let the Dalits or let the Dalit women speak for themselves, we are also, getting rid of any sort of responsibility that we should be taking about our own privileges. So in that sense, I think one of the greatest contributions of Dalit feminism has also been to, create this drive for self-reflection.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Sandeep's question.
Yes. Perfect. Moving on, Sandeep, can you please unmute yourself and ask your query?
Yeah, sorry, JaiBhim, sorry. Thank you. It was not allowing me to unmute, actually. That's why it took time. Sorry. Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Palm. I think it was really, it was wonderful talk. Thank you. Learned so much. I know the connectivity and all, a lot of people still don't agree that sati and widow remarriage ban and all this child marriage and all has nothing to do with Brahmanism. But I think thanks to bring this out from Dr. Baba Saheb's volumes. But I think my question, I would not take more time, is, are you seeing more power in hands of women in Ambedkarite movement now? The reason I'm asking this question is we see that the current Bahujan or Ambedkarite movement, especially the political one, is led by Bahenji Mayawati, and she is bringing in more ladies like Indu Chaudhary, Dr. Indu Chaudhary, and others. And looking at the student movement, the Priyanshi has won the elections from WAPSA this year. And even in US, we have Telmoji, who is running the Equality Labs and doing great work here. Looks like the movement is in the hands of women these days, the Ambedkarite movement or the Bahujan movement. So most people look at them as, as a ray of hope to lead the Ambedkarite movement rather than, looking at any other leadership. So what are your views on that?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sanjeev ji, for the question. And of course, the recent so the recent turn of events have been really hopeful, with Babsa and all the other women. Basically, it is a win, I would say. Given the political scenario in the country at this moment, these are the rays of hope. Now, I would say that, of course, with the election of the Dalit women leading these groups, one can say that there is some change is definitely coming in place. One cautionary note, or one of the conscious steps that I believe we'll always have to be aware of, is that participation of women should not end up being a token representation or just a matter of a momentary sort of assertion alone. And this I'm saying also, I'm coming from the debate surrounding women's reservation bill and the way in which women's reservation in the panchayats have played out historically. We have seen that a lot of times it just ends up being a token representation, with the men in the family being the constant, power groups really. So, it's great that at this moment, it seems it is definitely driven by the Dalit women. And it also goes on to show how or why it is very necessary to really reorient our discussions regarding caste from the gendered angle as well. So Dr. Ambedkar has talked about annihilation of caste. And if we don't really annihilate aspects of, and not just Dr. Ambedkar, Phule, Periyar, all of them have made gender also very central to their argument in annihilating or struggling against the caste system. So I believe that this is probably one of the, very crucial or catalyst moments where we are possibly finally leading towards this acceptance that in order to annihilate caste, we also need to see it holistically as to how it functions integrally with oppressive systems of gender. So I really sincerely hope that this is perhaps a beginning towards that.
Thank you so much for that, Anandita. I think in addition to what you have brought about pertaining to the representation being seen as tokenism, but the other perspective to look at it is that we are just looking at a very small horizon in time, right? And eventually what may happen is tokenism might move on to just becoming better candidates coming into the play. So in a holistic sense, I think it's very important to recognize how representation can become tokenism and identifying avenues on how to move away from the tokenistic attitude towards actually having compelling candidates at the decision table and compelling candidates actually making the decision. And I'm hopeful that at least in the panchayats, as the systems evolve, as the institutions become stronger, we will not necessarily be talking only about tokenism, because we'll have so many examples of very strong and powerful candidates making making a mark on the decision table. I'm going to pass it on to Sanjay ji for the next question, and then subsequently we'll take it ahead from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranay. And thank you, Dr. Anandita. It is a very intellectual speech, and it shows that you have put a lot of efforts for the preparation of this one. So thank you, respecting the Boston Study Group and the Ambedkar lecture series for doing this one. And we're looking forward for many more speeches from you on the similar subjects. And just I wanted to let you know that the Khabar Lahariya documentary in 2022, Boston Study Group basically showcased this particular documentary in the Boston International Film Festival. So we basically put the entry of that documentary there. My questions are at the two prong. One is, there is always a doubt about, or the questions about the feminist from the upper caste people, correct? About what they are doing for the Dalit feminism and all this. And as you correctly said, means what restraint these feminists from the upper caste should have, whether they should think that, okay, leave it to them, let them talk about them and don't ask any questions of. That is one thing. But at the same time, whether they are doing enough to address the Dalit feminism issue, that is one question. And second thing is, because of the rise of this Hindutva forces in India, how the feminism movement is getting impacted, if any. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, for the very, very pertinent questions. I would like to begin with the first question, that how can Savarna feminism, as we know, really address or talk about, Dalit feminism, so to say, or how can women, non-Dalit women, really address the question of caste? So now, if we are trying to aim for a solidarity-based sort of politics, whereby we are looking at non-Dalit women training themselves to be Dalit feminists, I would, maybe take my reference from Nivedita Menon, who says in Seeing Like a Feminist, that feminism needs to be understood as as a very dynamic movement, which is constantly revising its definitions. So it would also mean to constantly unlearn and learn some of the newer things that it has or it may not have been familiar with. So feminism, or mainstream Indian feminism or Savarna feminism, always has this problem of being, have this guilt issue whereby it thinks that, okay, they should not talk about Dalit women because they are not Dalits, or only Dalit women should speak for themselves. Now, in my opinion, I would say that such ghettoization would unfortunately lead to much more narrowing down of political ideas, and I think a solidarity is tremendously crucial, just like the way we have seen in perhaps the film Turup itself, where we see that it's even though Nilima is the one, the upper caste woman, who is the journalist, who is knowledgeable in, who she has degrees in, journalism and so on and so forth. It is actually Monica who is having the entire control and who is teaching Nilima as to what sort of questions she should ask and when the news should be published. And Nilima is actually following that method, even though she is of the opinion that information or the news should be released immediately. Monica and her friends actually tell Nilima that no, you should wait for a couple of days. So I think, we can learn a lot from this specific scene here. As feminists, then it would also mean to really listen to Dalit women instead of going about with our own, given predetermined assumptions about what the oppression of Dalit women really looks like. So I think it is a very, very conscious political approach. It's something that is achieved and not automatically ascribed. So that is, the way in which we can look at basically or approach the upper caste or Savarna feminism approaching Dalit feminism. Now, as far as the second question is concerned, in today's the way in which the world, especially the Hindutva politics, has impacted the question of gender, I feel that we are again, constantly at the back foot. So on paper, it seems like a very emancipatory time to really have things like women's reservation bill being passed and going to be implemented and so on and so forth. It seems to be, but we also have the CAA and the NRC and all sorts of citizenship acts being implemented, with the questions coming in as to who really is the citizen of this nation and so on and so forth. And with the rise of in violence on women, I feel that we are, as feminists, we are standing at a very, very crucial and problematic juncture where voices are constantly getting stifled. So it is very difficult, now to speak or say anything with so many, intellectuals getting imprisoned on a daily basis. It becomes a matter of courage to really speak and so on and so forth. So I think that at this moment, I think another feminism or the country is going through another sort of crisis where feminism or feminists really need to take up the baton once again and proceed towards a much more, and this is where probably solidarity is inherently necessary, because so many of the issues are intricately linked with each other. We cannot go on by remaining in our nice little bubbles in a separate sort of concern, saying that, okay, this is my concern, I'll speak only about this. So I feel that we are facing a crisis at this moment, and we really need to, rise to the occasion by really bringing together as many people as possible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. In the interest of time, we're going to take the last question from Dr. J. Ambedkar. And the question is on the sequence of female liberation in Tamil Nadu, especially in line with the Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly's legal provisions and the development over the last couple of decades. That is the question at the chat. And if you have any particular opinion about how the discourse in Tamil Nadu has proceeded over the last few decades, especially in the light of Dravidian politics that has emerged, and the AIDMK that has emerged. We had a female lead into a political party in the South Indian states after a very, very long time with the emergence of Jayalalitha. So how did the interplay of caste and gender play out, if any, in that particular situation? I think that is the understanding of this question from my end. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ambedkar, for the question. Now, Tamil Nadu, even to generally speak, is always a very interesting location to speak of, because it has always emerged as state which is very conscious of its caste politics and also gender politics. So we have perhaps the most number of literary or even political writings coming from one of the major states has been Tamil Nadu, and we have also seen some of the questions or debates regarding caste arising from Tamil Nadu as well. Now, with reference to the specific, female liberation in Tamil Nadu in the Legislative Assembly, I don't think I have too much to add to that. But one of the aspects that I would like to, talk about is that one of the ongoing debates, not at the assembly level, but it's also something that has arisen from my current discussion or project on governance also, whereby we see that an ongoing debate in these states is that the very idea of women's representation in politics or in governance bodies of local governance, a lot of times we do have reservation based on scheduled caste and scheduled tribe status. But another ongoing debate is how to really, reconcile with the issue of the other backward caste question, because they constitute one of the largest demographies in the country and in various states, in fact. So, the caste question then takes up a very different and nuanced sort of role, where it goes beyond the spheres of scheduled castes and tribes, and brings in question of other sort of representations as well. So unfortunately, I do not have any specific comment to your question, but this was a thought from my side.
No, I think you answered it very comprehensively. And I do want to be conscious of time. It has been about 85 odd minutes since the time you started this discussion. And it was a very, very intriguing session. I think the entire ambit of the issues that you discussed, right from the genesis of the caste system to how gender played then to how gender is manifesting now, and what does it mean to have intersectional movements? What does it mean to build solidarities, not only amongst the downtrodden communities, but also solidarities across the section in order to look at this, because the impact of the issue is not necessarily only falling on Dalit women, but is falling on women in general. So what does it mean to go ahead? I think a lot of your insights were very, very telling, were very, very pertinent. You were also very patient with so many of the questions that all the members had. And I cannot appreciate you enough for giving your time to the Boston Study Group. We have a journalist from Bihar, Sonu, who wanted to take a screenshot of the session and use this. So if we have your permission, we can take a screenshot and then
sure, it will be my pleasure. Yeah.
Perfect. Sonu, this is the moment. I think we would have taken the screenshot. Sonu would have taken the screenshot. His screen is locked for some reason. But I think that is that. I am again grateful for your time, and I'm grateful for all the participants from across the globe, from different time zones, who have joined in and who gave such interesting insights and such deep insights in terms of in terms of asking brilliant questions and subsequently drilling the most and extracting the most from your deep insights and your scholarship. Thank you so much again, everybody. Have a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining. Sanjay ji, do you have any more concluding remarks?
No,